The movie starts with Johnny, a successful and incredibly charming businessman, going for a morning run. Although he looks like a sophisticated person, he is actually a womanizer. He pretends to be different people to date women, usually younger than him. Later that day, at the country club, his friend Fabio tells everyone how Johnny used 3 fake identities all in 1 week just to meet women. To tease him back, Johnny says maybe his wife wants to date him too. Later, he grabs lunch with his friend Dario, who is also his doctor. Dario asks if all the chasing after women with fake identities is tiring. He suggests his friend to settle down with one mature woman, reminding him he's almost 50. Just then, a call interrupts their chat. Gianni mentions it's about his mom. Dario is delighted, hoping they have reconciled. However, his friend bluntly reveals that his mother has passed away. After the lunch is over, Johnny rushes to the graveyard, but gets lost in a Filipino procession, mistaking it for his mom's. He throws out a quick, fake apology to the family before finding the right spot. At the funeral, his twin brother gives a heartfelt goodbye, but Gianni skips his own speech. While explaining his late arrival for the ceremony, he uses sweeping gestures to refer to Filipino people who usually work as maids. This reveals that he's also a bit of a racist. After the funeral comes to an end, Johnny's brother gives him the keys to their mom's house. Inside, family photos make him slightly emotional as he sits in her wheelchair. Soon enough, he switches on her old radio and begins grooving to a song when a young beauty named Alessia sneaks in, startling him. Alessia, the new neighbor, explains she used to help handicapped folks at a nursing home. Seeing him in the wheelchair, she offers to volunteer if he needs anything. Gianni, who is a ferocious player, immediately starts faking being disabled. The next day at work, we see his ruthless businessman side as he tears into his team during a meeting. He reminds them that his sneaker company, High Speed, sells a lifestyle, not just shoes. The new intern Julia proposes diversifying marketing with Paralympic athletes to connect with disabled customers. In response, Johnny scoffs and says his clients are Instagram influencers, not disabled people who barely use one pair of shoes their whole life. Trying to set an example, he then fires Julia on the spot. With the meeting done, Johnny gets a bag of old clothes from his assistant Luciana and rushes back to his late mother's home. Using his fake handicap, he guilt-trips Alessia into accepting an offer for coffee in his kitchen. While talking to her over coffee, Johnny learns she's more into single, fun life than serious relationships. Slowly, he begins to realize she's into outgoing, healthy, and wealthy guys, and his whole middle-class handicapped act seems to backfire. Just as Alessia leaves after coffee, Johnny sees his chance slipping away. He calls out and reveals himself as the owner of High Speed, with 148 stores across Europe and a huge villa. Slightly taken aback, Alessia instantly changes her tune and invites him to her country house for lunch next Sunday. On Sunday, he arrives at the address, but decides to park far away. Seeing the clouds gather, he puts on a raincoat and wheels himself to the house with great difficulty. Inside, he meets Alessia's family, her grandmother, who is on oxygen support, her brother, and parents. Then Alessia's sister, Chiara, arrives in a car. He's excited by her beauty, but then sees she uses a wheelchair too. Finally, he understands why Alessia invited him, to set him up with her disabled sister and not herself. After lunch, he and Chiara chat outside. She tells him that she loves playing sports and is a professional violin player. Uninterested but trying to be civil, he simply nods without adding anything from his side. When Gianni gets back to Rome, he tells his friends about Chiara. His doctor friend Dario asks about her personality, while others ask if she's hot. He admits she's beautiful, but he's not into disabled girls. As the conversation goes on, his friend Fabio challenges him to sleep with her, and Gianni accepts it with a smug grin. Meanwhile, Alessia visits his mother's home wanting to return his raincoat, but instead meets his brother, who doesn't know about Gianni's lie. She tells him about his brother's charity work in Botswana and sympathizes with his disability. Johnny's brother is surprised but continues to play along. Hearing all this, he later confronts his brother about the lie, asking him not to stoop so low. However, Johnny simply deflects the topic by making fun of his baldness. The following day, before leaving for work, he leaves a voicemail for Chiara, asking her out on a Saturday. But to his surprise, Chiara pays him a visit that very morning in his office. Realizing he doesn't have a wheelchair in his office, he awkwardly sits on his desk. Chiara informs him that she can't make it on Saturday, but extends an invitation to watch her tennis tournament for disabled people later that day. Trying to impress her, he makes up a fake story about his company's support for disabled athletes. Later that afternoon, Johnny, in his wheelchair, watches Chiara play a hard-fought tennis match and is genuinely impressed. After the match, she invites him to lunch along with her disabled friends. However, the lunch doesn't go as he had hoped. Constantly bombarded by questions on his disability from her friends, he feels overwhelmed and even has a nightmare that night. In the next scene, Johnny flies to Turin, where Chiara is performing with her orchestra. He buys an electric wheelchair from a local man and grabs the balcony seat in the theater. For the first time in his life, he is genuinely moved by classical music. After the concert, he surprises Chiara, who asks why he's in Turin. He lies about being nearby for work and dropping in on accident. Both of them then make their way to an upscale restaurant for dinner. During the dinner, Gianni tries to confess that he lied to her about his disability, but at the last second, he deviates by saying that he lied about him being nearby. He admits that he came here just to pursue her. However, his clumsiness with the electric wheelchair is obvious for anyone to see, as he keeps on bumping against tables throughout the conversation. After dinner, Chiara takes him to her hotel where they kiss. But she stops things from going further, which disappoints our guy. After returning from Turin, Johnny asks Dario if paraplegics get erections. Already anticipating where the conversation is heading, Dario explains that they do. But for Chiara, pleasure depends on where her spinal injury is. He then suggests Gianni to forget the bet, reminding him that he's a 49-year-old and not a teenager. However, his friend playfully brushes it off. In the next scene, Gianni invites Chiara to dinner the next day, before driving to pick up the girl he met on the morning run. On the other hand, Chiara has a hearty conversation with her sister. As the two siblings share a cigarette, she reveals how happy she is that Gianni sees her as a whole woman instead of just pitying her. The next day, Chiara visits Gianni's huge house. She navigates around the furniture easily, while Gianni continuously bumps into things in his wheelchair. At dinner, she asks how he got his feet paralyzed. Gianni makes up a fake story saying that he had a similar accident to Christopher Reeves, the Superman actor. However, Chiara says that Christopher Reeves was paralyzed from the neck below. Trying to save face, Gianni says he fell off from a pony, much to the amusement of Chiara. Cautiously, she then shares her own story of the horrible car accident. Her passenger only broke his collarbone, and her violin on the next seat didn't even get scratched. But in a cruel twist of fate, she lost the use of both of her legs. Trying to uplift the gloomy mood, Gianni unveils his great surprise. He gives her a rubber noodle and asks her to put it around her chest. Then he clicks a button and water floods in the dining room, rising up to their chests. Buoyed by the rubber noodle, they float weightless in the water. In a moment of passion, both of them kiss and make love. However, later, when the water dries out, Chiara informs Gianni that she has no feeling below her legs. Visibly emotional but perplexed, Gianni tells her that he too felt it only in his forehead. When she falls asleep, he quickly takes a selfie of the two of them to gloat to his friends. The next day, Gianni shows his friends the photo, winning his bet with Fabio. However, he hides the fact that Chiara can't feel anything. Later that night, we see Fabio's wife in Gianni's house. She's in her nightdress and accidentally breaks a wine glass. Jokingly, she says she's being clumsy like a handicapped person, which offends Gianni. Without revealing the reason, he tells her to get dressed and leave. Days pass without Gianni and Chiara communicating with each other. But slowly, we start seeing changes in his outlook towards life. He asks Luciana to recall the intern who suggested expanding the marketing of the shoe company to paraplegic athletes. The next day, on his morning run, he calls Chiara and asks to set up a meeting, saying he has an important confession. Following this, he goes to her house. Chiara takes him to her room and asks him to wait while she finishes her violin practice. For the first time since they met, he sees photos of her when she could still use both her legs. Burdened by the lie, he stands to confess, but sits down before she turns around. Noticing Gianni less jittery than usual, Chiara says he's getting better at using his wheelchair. They kiss, and she asks him about his confession. However, he doesn't have the courage to do it, so he quickly changes the topic. They then share a nervous laughter as she remembers her ex-boyfriend dumping her after her accident. With a heavy heart, Chiara confesses that lies and deception hurt her more than her injuries. Hearing this, Gianni becomes scared, so he decides to keep his secret to himself for now. Chiara then asks him to introduce her to his friends. As a result, he forces Dario and Luciana to come to dinner along with them. On the way, Dario suggests he might be in love and urges him to confess and put an end to this sham. Furthermore, he threatens that if Gianni doesn't confess, either he or Luciana will. Later, during dinner, Dario urges his friend to reveal the truth. Seeing him hesitate, he decides to do it himself, when suddenly, Gianni spills soup on his suit and asks him to come to the bathroom. Inside the bathroom, Dario tells Gianni he must confess because this lie has gone too far now. But their conversation is interrupted by a restaurant employee. Hurriedly, Gianni pretends to use the toilet to hide the fact that he can walk. The entire night he pretends to be paralyzed, and the truth is once again hidden. Gianni's brother visits Alessia with flowers and exposes his lies to her. Angered by the deception, she marches on to Gianni and slaps him. She then gives him a 2-day ultimatum to tell Chiara the complete truth. Later, our hero visits with his estranged father, who also turns out to be a womanizer. However, during a heartfelt conversation with his son, he clearly expresses his regrets about being a bad husband. He then urges Gianni not to make the same mistakes and confess the truth. However, the latter fears losing her if the truth is exposed. It is evident that he has fallen in love with her. Their conversation is interrupted by an announcement about a trip to Lourdes, a famous Catholic site in France whose holy water is rumored to have healing powers. This gives the father and son a crazy idea. Gianni will take Chiara to Lourdes, pretend the water healed his fake disability, and win her back. On the other hand, Alessia gently tells her sister that Gianni might not be the best fit for her. However, their conversation is interrupted by a phone call from Gianni, who asks her to go to Lourdes with him. Surprised, Alessia asks her sister why on earth are they going to Lourdes. Chiara replies that maybe Gianni wants a miracle to happen. Fed up with hiding the truth, she shockingly reveals that she knows he can walk. As someone who uses a wheelchair, she recognized his awkwardness right away. Chiara confesses she let the lie go on because it felt good to be loved, even if it was built on deception. In the next scene, the group reaches the sanctuary Notre Dame of Lourdes, where they're greeted by Father Walter, who also happens to be Italian. He asks Gianni to meet him inside the cathedral alone. When our hero goes there, Father Walter tells him that he knows he's not handicapped. Without waiting for an explanation, he warns Gianni not to stand up in front of everyone, saying it could give people false hope and make them believe in miracles. Shortly after, Gianni comes out of the cathedral continuing his fake act. Meanwhile, Chiara wanders into the middle of the road, oblivious that a truck is approaching. When Gianni notices this, he gets up on his feet and pulls her back from danger. Although shaken, she plays along, pretending it is indeed a miracle that he can walk. She then boards the bus and leaves the place crying. Back in Rome, Gianni's world starts to crumble piece by piece. At the club, Fabio, aware of his wife's affair, confronts him. To make matters worse, Luciana also hands in her resignation. Seeking solace, Johnny visits his mother's grave and expresses his love for her for the first time in his life. He then rehires Julia and gives her the responsibility of launching the new ad campaign, the one she'd proposed before, featuring disabled athletes. Desperate to see Chiara, Johnny storms to her parents' house, where he's confronted by her grandmother. He pours his heart out, explaining how Chiara isn't returning his calls. However, the old lady retorts that Chiara is too smart to fall for his type, knowing exactly what men like him want. Johnny then says that he is 50, physically fit for his age, but mentally a mess. He then professes his love for Chiara and promises to be a better man, accidentally breaking a vase in his passionate outburst. Hearing all this, the old lady reveals that Chiara is catching a bus to the Menotti Theater in Spoleto. She gives him the route and timings, adding he can catch her at Nami if he hurries. But before he leaves, she warns him, if he ever hurts Chiara again, she wouldn't hesitate to make a handicap in reality. Thankfully, he's able to catch up to the bus before it's too late. However, refusing to melt straight away, Chiara points out that she doesn't need anyone to pity her. She then completely ignores his pleas and asks the bus to move on. In the next scene, we see Gianni back in Rome, running his heart out. Heavy with guilt, he refuses to stop until his heart rate gets too fast and eventually falls on his knees. To his surprise, he's greeted by Chiara on her wheelchair. When he asks what she's doing in Rome, she cheekily mimics his earlier answer and says she was just passing by and happened to search for running trails in Rome. Choosing to forget the past, she then embraces him and gives him a ride on her lap. In the final scene, we see Gianni, his brother, who's now dating Alessia, and Chiara's family celebrate his 50th birthday together. The credits roll as Gianni carries Chiara in his arms and dances slowly.